All right, welcome everybody. This is Developing Palates, and this is the team review recap of the My Father El Centurion H-2K Connecticut Toro. And on the review was Jiunn Liu and myself, Aaron Loomis. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a recap of the written review that we have on the site. This gives us a chance to kind of have a discussion after the fact, after we've seen what each of us has written up and how we scored the cigar. So it'll give us a chance to kind of bounce ideas back and forth from each other, why we scored things a certain way, ask questions about what would have been needed to be different to have achieved different scores and things like that. So with that being said, I think we're going to jump right into that. So the first category is the pre-light experience. And Jiunn, you scored the pre-light as an average, and I scored it as a very good. So can you kind of give a little bit of a recap on what your experience was with the pre-light and why you scored it the way you did?
Sure. So pre-light is consisting of just the overall look of the cigar. Just the overall look of it, which is namely what you see in the wrapper, the roll of it, and then the nose stat, the flavors that we pick up both on on the cold draw, as well as smelling the actual cigar, which is smelling the wrapper and smelling the foot of the cigar. So I weigh all those things equally. So first, in terms of the construction of just the feel of the cigar, I felt like this was your stereotypical well-rolled cigar that I typically expect out of the My Father factory.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that, I thought it was pretty well-rolled. It has some fairly tight, invisible seams, a good triple cap that's, looks like it's slapped on there pretty good, so it shouldn't have any issues with the cut. And it was all that. My main thing from calling that aspect average was, to me, if it's going to get to the good and up score, it has to have a relatively almost like this really slick Colorado red kind of a wrapper. I'm a total sucker for something like that. Or it has to be something that's in the realm of just, something that's just really like a really good Oscuro wrapper or a hearty Mexican San Andreas that I tend to be more aesthetically appealing as compared to this cigar wrapper was. It was kind of spotted, medium brown. It didn't really have much in terms of just the uniformity and that crisp wrapper look, which is what the wrapper is your I guess your moneymaker in your flagship, right? If you're gonna make a cigar, so
Right.
and then to go through the actual pre-light flavors, I also thought that it was average.
Okay.
And when I say average, I mean if I'm picking up pre-light flavors in the sense of cold draw, in the smell of the wrapper and the foot, and it's in line with what most other cigars have the note of,
Mm-hmm.
such as barnyard musk, cedar, some sort of a pepper spice. That to me is average. So in order to get it bumped up from there, I look for things like if it's anything in the perhaps the fruitier notes, right? So some cigars that, especially a lot of fresh rolls out there, it's almost like a raisiny rum-like smell to it that I get,
Mm-hmm.
and that separates it from just being average because that's a very unique, delicious, good note.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So for me, I scored it very good. I thought the cigar looked pretty nice. It's kind of medium brown. For me, I didn't really see much of the splotchiness in the color. It seemed pretty uniform to me. It had a nice sheen to it, and the wrapper was wrapped pretty tight. There was no gaps in the seams, no lifting of the seams, and on this one you couldn't really see unless you put it at the right angle or whatever. You wouldn't necessarily see the wrap lines. The color was pretty pretty even across all of that. And the triple cap applied pretty much perfectly on the cigar. So like you said, the construction that you expect out of the My Father factory, which is very typically very good. For me, the aroma side, that's kind of where it fell down a little bit. It was really just a bit of hay, slightly sweet from the wrapper. The foot was sweeter than the wrapper, but it was still kind of that, just a really sweet kind of a hay flavor. So, more so for the appearance than for the aroma, but I still thought it was a very good looking cigar, in my opinion. All right, so let's get into the actual smoking the cigar. So hitting up the first third. So on this category, you scored it as an average. I scored it as a good. So just kind of give people a little bit of an idea. The good is just the step right above average. So we were, pretty close to being on par with how we rated this. So you want to kind of jump into how the first third hit you in regard to flavor wise?
Sure. I felt like in general, the beginning of the cigar and the entire extent of the first third had some good notes, but they were very faint notes, to the point where almost I felt like, well, maybe the cigar is just warming up, right? So they call it a U.S. hybrid Connecticut wrapper, which, who knows what the hybrid aspect of it means, but apparently within this Toro, for me, it's been just mainly faint notes. So, when I say faint notes, it's notes that doesn't really is distinctive, and it doesn't hit you right when as soon as you take a draw from it.
Mm-hmm.
It's you kind of have to grab for it and just kind of, keep thinking, well, I think I taste this. I get a little nuance of this, a little snippet of this. So in terms of those notes, they were delicious notes. Anytime I have a cigar that has notes of just, creamy sugarness, there's like this burnt sugar aspect of it. I got faint notes of bread and yeast and a little bit of charred wood. And those notes, typically, which I find in many cigars, especially Connecticut's, they do meld well together.
Mm-hmm.
But it just felt like, it was tad on the light side, and it made it almost feel like I shouldn't be that I didn't enjoy it enough as if it was more if it popped out on me more.
Right. Okay. Yeah, for me, it was, I think that it was a tale of kind of creaminess and some woodiness with a little bit of mix of pepper in there. When I first lit it up, it was like a bit of a Dole pepper that was kind of mixed in with the creaminess. And the retrohale was kind of, I'd say a bit of cedar on there as well. But kind of as that third progressed, the pepper kind of brightened up a little bit. It wasn't really that dull pepper that kind of just like sits on your tongue and just, you just always know it's there. It kind of actually like started playing in with the flavors of the cream and cedar.
Yeah.
But then as the third went on, kind of more of a woodiness came out in it. But then the creaminess is really what took over the retrohale as it progressed and as that third finished up. But then some mineral flavor came in as well, which is something I enjoy when it's not an overpowering component. So, all in all, it had some transitions there in the first third, but nothing that I would, consider, a fantastic set of flavors or combination of flavors. And so I think for me, the first third was just slightly less than medium in regards to strength. Did you say what kind of how the strength level was for you, or?
Yeah, I thought it was I tag it on both body and strength to be at a solid medium.
Okay.
I was even thinking about, it was kind of like bordering that line between medium minus and medium for me.
Right.
It's interesting because when you talk about tasting spice and just pepper specifically, I didn't taste any of it. And granted, most Connecticut cigars, now granted, of course, this is this hybrid one that they claim. I do get a little slight bit of pepper, but I didn't even notice it enough to even slap it down on my review. And
Okay.
I'm very sensitive to pepper notes typically.
Right.
But I hear you on the minerality aspect of it. There's such a earthy minerality to it, and something that I equate to with something that has tannins. Like if you drink mostly any dry red wines out there, you get this tannin, which is like a, it coats your mouth with like a filminess that sounds bad, but it's actually helps with the body of
Right.
the wine, and certainly
Right.
for cigars as well.
Okay. Great. So let's hop over to the second third then. So for the second third, you rated it as subpar, which is the rating just below average, and I rated it as average. So again, we're just kind of within one rating between each other. So go ahead and hop into your thoughts on how the second third flavor was.
Sure. So one reason for knocking it down from average to subpar, in terms of flavors, everything that I tasted from the first third carried over to the second third, but with one difference that's kind of a cigar experience killer for me. So when I was talking about the first third, I talked about getting notes of charred wood, and something kicked inside me when I thought, man, like I hope this isn't one of those Connecticut's in which I taste bitterness out of, because I do taste bitterness out of Connecticut's. Not so much on Ecuadorian Connecticut wrappers, but namely U.S. ones. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's exactly what I tasted. I didn't feel like the bitterness was so dominant that I couldn't taste the other flavors, but it was always in the background that it reminded me that, oh, I taste the bitterness.
Right.
And that's why I knocked it a subpar.
Okay. Yes, for me, when you're talking about kind of the charred wood, that kind of flavor hits me in this second third. When it starts out, it's creamy wood again that kind of continued from the previous third, and the mineral was still there in the retrohale, but um, I'd say maybe half inch into the third, the woodiness really picked up and intensified, and the cream kind of dropped back a little bit. So that was a slight change there. But then around the middle of the third, I got more of like kind of a barbecue smoke flavor that jumped in there. So that was the primary flavor in the mouth, but then the retrohale kind of stayed woody with the bit of mineral. And then as got towards the end of the third, that barbecue flavor back out and went back to kind of a general woodiness for me. And but that mineral always kind of stayed there in regards to the retrohale, and the flavor was pretty much back to the kind of the creamy wood that is kind of a note that kind of stayed with the cigars for the entire thing for me. But the strength did pick up just a little bit here for me in the second. I'd say a solid medium for me, in this third here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so final third flavors. We both scored this as average, so pretty close. Staying close with each other in regards to how the flavor is being scored. So go ahead and hop into your thoughts on the final third of this cigar.
Sure. So when I'm reviewing my final third notes, my qualitative description almost doesn't warrant the quantitative. Some of my readers may think, because in the last third, I said that I started by saying the flavors really started to wake up, to go
Mm-hmm.
from that faint note, trying to grab it, nuance kind of a thing, to I distinctly taste these notes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same notes that I tasted within the first and second notes, but just intensified and amplified. So that sweet burnt sugar is still there, cedary goodness, white pepper spice, still get that rich minerality to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because of that, I moved it up from the subpar of second third to the back to an average on the last third. But even though those notes were more distinct and amplified, I still tasted in the background the bitterness that carried over from second third,
Okay.
and that's what kept me from letting it, to me, being an average to the next level of being a good cigar.
Okay. All right. Yeah, for me, the final third started out with kind of a bigger cedar flavor than I had gotten previously in it. So, the kind of general woodiness I had earlier on is really starting to become more defined, kind of like what you were saying, is that they're really starting to come out a little bit more. So cedar in the mouth, cedar on the retrohale. There was a bit of spice to the cedar, which was nice. But then as the third moved along, the cedar actually transitioned to more of an oak. So where things were more of kind of like a general woodiness, like you're finally getting some defined wood flavors. So you got cedar, then you have oak. So it really seemed that it just took a long time for things to like really become where the flavors could stand out on their own, but still kind of pair well with each other. And the flavors seemed to be kind of coating my tongue a bit more in this third as well. But then as it went along, a long-lasting spicy finish on the tongue, which was nice. And then the retrohale kind of came back to a cedar at the end, where it had opened up to more of that oak flavor. And for me in this third, the strength seemed to slowly increase throughout this final third. So starting at that medium level that the second third kind of ended on, and then kind of got up to a little bit above medium, but you could kind of, as it was going along, you felt that it was kind of moving up on the strength level.
Yeah, I agree
So,
on the strength and body level moving up, but I still rated it a medium because I felt like it wasn't really. I mean, it was definitely kicked up in terms of both body and strength, but
right.
I didn't think like it was nowhere near being a medium full. So
Sure. Okay. So we'll get into the burn. So for the cigar burn, you rated it as subpar, and I rated it as very good. So this is probably one of the areas where we had a bit of a further set of descriptors for how we rated this. So talk about your experience with
sure.
the burn.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we smoke. Well, so far we're smoking one cigar each for the
Mhm.
reviews, but two, it really shows you how a typical handmade product in the cigar um, can drastically differ.
Mhm.
So, so yeah, I mean, this was a surprise, very surprising for something that comes out of my father factory. The burn for the first and second third was good. Fairly sharp, slightly flowery ash, consistent 1.5 inch ash holds, and everything was just looking great. But for whatever reason, on the last third, right after I took that primary Centurion band
Right.
off, uh, the wrapper just split.
Ah.
So I mean, I don't attribute it to the actual wrapper glue because I took the band off with a fairly decent amount of ease.
Mhm.
But right after I draw the cigar, that thing is completely split,
Yeah, that's a
and then
bummer.
it required me to do a touch up. I personally hate touch ups. I think anytime you put fire to a already burning cigar, it
Mhm.
singes the tobacco, and you get that awful, ashy, unpleasant, tar buildup and all that nastiness. And I got that a little bit, but after purging it a couple of times, it went back on track. But I rated it a subpar because within non-Cuban cigars these days, there's no excuse for something like that.
Right.
But at the same rate, I do understand that it is handmade, and it seems like a perhaps a one-off situation because I know you had a great burn.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have any complaints. I mean, it wasn't like the most perfect burn in the world. Otherwise, I would have scored it as the top rating. But it burned really well. As you said, the ash held on in good chunks. So I'd say inch and a half at a time. It was no flakiness, anything like that. So I wasn't worried about something dropping off into my lap. It was just you kind of saw it getting to that point where it was starting to lean a little bit, and you just go ahead and tap it off so that you don't have an accident like that. um, but one of the things I always just kind of use as a classification for this is I really didn't have to go back to the lighter at all. I mean, I'm not one that's really like antsy to try to get the burn always on track. I'll let it burn off kilter for a while to see if it can correct itself, but this didn't even get to that point. I mean, I would say if it ever got off, a eighth of an inch, then that would have been the furthest it ever got off. But it really stayed on line. I didn't have to go back to the lighter at all. So that's why I gave it such a good rating for the burn. All right, so let's jump over to draw. So you gave this the amazing, which is the top score, and I gave the draw an average. So another variance here in regards to our experience. So go ahead and talk about your experience with the draw.
Yeah, amazing draw. It had just enough of tug to let you know that you are drawing on a cigar, but it wasn't loose, it wasn't tight. It was effortless, but not too effortless. And it's short tug on a cigar. Yeah, not much else to say that.
Okay. Yeah, for me it was pretty firm. There were some pockets where it would open up a little bit. So whenever I'd get to that point, I was like, oh, okay, we just had to get to that point where, things warmed up enough or something that the tobacco would open up and allow for that. But it would get back to the firmness. And it wasn't anything that's like, it's really bad, but I was working to pull the smoke through the cigar. So that's kind of, what led me to score it the way I did. It's not my preferred level. So I kind of gave it that mid-range score. It definitely could have been better, but it wasn't. I don't think it had any effect on being able to pull any flavors, and obviously didn't affect the burn at all. So,
what kind of cutter did you use?
I just used a guillotine cut on it,
Okay.
using my Paleo. I didn't go back for an additional cut. I don't think it was anything to do with how much was cut off at the head. I just think it was, because as I said, it went through there were some pockets where it opened up. So if it never changed, I could say maybe, yeah, it did. It was, maybe a restriction at the head, but there were points where it opened up. So and it wasn't for me putting any additional pressure on the head to try to open it up. So I don't think it was anything related to that portion of it. All right, so the overall category it's a wrap up of our entire experience. So you rated this as subpar, and I rated it as average. So still really pretty close to each other on this category. So go ahead and talk about your overall experience with cigar and why you rated it the way you did.
Sure. I thought that within the spectrum, or let's say spectrum of Connecticut cigars that you typically get, I thought that it was a notch below the average. And within this cigar, I got the typical flavors that you get out of a Connecticut, which is, there's a sweetness, creaminess, not a lot of pepper, something that'll just easy going, right? To kind of perhaps fire up your day and have an ordeal. But although I got those things, they were faint flavors, and I disliked having to reach out and to try to grab those flavors.
Right.
So that compounded by the shadowing bitterness that especially creeped up in the second and last third, which a lot of U.S. Connecticut cigars fall victims to.
Right.
That just kind of put it over the edge, and I thought that, and so those two things made it a notch below average.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Yeah, for me the experience was pretty standard. It was an average experience for me. There are a few core flavors, woodiness, cedar, pepper, cream. The mineral was in there. And then towards the end, things became a little bit more defined with more defined cedar and oak. A little bit of that barbecue smoke flavor in the middle third. But none of those flavors were real standout flavors or like really had me kind of on the edge of my seat waiting to get more of that or anything like that. I will say that this is not, I think, what most people think of when they're thinking of a Connecticut cigar. So typically they'll think of a Connecticut as very light colored wrapper, very mild in regards to strength, kind of that bitterness that you were talking about at times, maybe not a lot of flavor, but this is not that style of a Connecticut cigar. So, you mentioned earlier about the hybrid Connecticut wrapper. So this is a different cigar than a standard Connecticut. So for me, I think it might be a good opportunity for somebody that does smoke the standard Connecticut's that are into that kind of mild strength level. If they want to try to expand themselves or step up and not necessarily jump into a different style wrapper like a like a Habano, or definitely not jumping into anything kind of Maduro level. But this might be something that kind of helps them um, expand their palate a little bit, or expand their range and trying to step up to things. But because the strength level for me is slightly below medium as it starts, and then increases just slightly above medium as it ends. So if that medium level in the second third kind of really starts hitting them, then they don't have to, they can kind of skip the final third if they want to, if they're just kind of easing into it. But overall for me, I'd say it's an average level cigar.
Yeah.
So with that said, we'll get into our scores. So the way that you scored this cigar, it turned out to be a 4.63. And for me, it turned out to be a 5.73. So in our scoring system, which goes from 0 to 10, a completely average cigar would be a 5. So for you, it was pretty much slightly below average, and for me, it was slightly above average. So not a huge gap between our scores, but I think we're kind of within that same range. I know you had not as good experiences on pre-light and kind of in that second, third range, but other than that, I think we were pretty much on par.
Yeah, it sounds like with this one, anyways, we had a pretty similar experience, which doesn't always happen with you and I. But
exactly. Yeah. So it was an interesting outcome on this one. So it was good to see that it kind of. I mean, not that one of us scored it out of this world, and one of us said it wasn't anything special at all, but kind of something that fell into that middle ground wheelhouse, and might be a good fit for somebody that's looking for this type of a cigar.
Yeah, and just to let people know, when Aaron and I review cigars, we don't look at each other's score or notes at all before we smoke them. So, the only thing that we know is what's in front of us.
Right.
And we will never look at each other's score and descriptors in general and each other's reviews before we actually smoke it. So.
Yep, exactly. All right, well, that is a wrap for this review recap. So go ahead and check us out on developingpalates.com. You can go ahead and check out the full written review if you want to see all of our notes, all of our scores, all of our category rankings, and the vital stats for the cigar. And if you don't see it on the front page because you're seeing this video just straight through YouTube, and it's not on the front page, make sure you do a search on the page, and you'll find it in the review section and be able to read through the entire thing. So thanks for joining us, and we will catch you on the next review recap.